Whether you're joining one of our events for the first time or if you're a seasoned regular, welcome to the Developer Marketing Summit. We have an incredible selection of innovative content lined up for you today, but before we dive in, I just want to say a huge thank you to our sponsors, speakers, and you, our lovely audience, for joining us. From wherever in the world you are watching, we're sure you'll enjoy today's talks. To get the most out of these sessions, please make sure you're sharing your feedback and asking your questions in the comment section for our speakers to answer. Each of today's sessions recordings will be uploaded into our on-demand content library, which you can access with a PMA Pro membership or Access All Areas Pass. We are also really excited to announce the launch of the Developer Marketing Alliance becoming its very own community. You can now join our Slack channel to connect with
Hello everyone and welcome to the Developer Marketing Summit. I'm really excited to have you all here, and we're kicking it off with our first live session. So don't forget to leave your questions in the comments section. So please welcome our first speaker, which is Liz Moy, the Developer Evangelist from Twilio.
Thanks so much, Beth. Really excited to be here today and chat with you all a little bit about getting into the developer mindset. So just to introduce myself, my name's Liz and I'm a developer evangelist at Twilio, which is a cloud communications and customer engagement company. And I really enjoy having these discussions and speaking on this topic because I come from a marketing background. So I was working in PR and marketing. And then I ended up going to a coding boot camp and worked as a software engineer for several years before transitioning into developer relations. And really, it's been just a great experience because it's been an opportunity to sort of bring together two things that I really enjoy doing and I'm very interested in. And as I was thinking about how to structure this and what we could discuss today, I was thinking back to actually even before I became a marketer, because when I was in university, I went to journalism school. So I was thinking a lot about, how do I get into the mindset of somebody that I'm writing a story about? How do I start to think like them? And I really feel like that experience has helped me so much throughout my career in order to really dive into the way someone thinks about something in order to better communicate with them. So what we're going to do in the session today is we're going to go through some questions that as a marketer and as somebody that works in technology, you can think about as you're trying to think like a developer and consider what they might want to know or hear about your product. We're going to go into a framework that you can use for how to think about those touch points that you have with developers in the developer community. And then I'm going to share some tactics that I found helpful and that I've seen in the industry that can help you get some answers to those questions so that you can start to more effectively communicate with the developers that use your product or that you would like to connect with to try out your product. So before we get going here, I think the number one piece of advice that has been shared with me that I found helpful and that I would readily share with anybody is just don't make assumptions. I think it's very easy, even as somebody who was a full-time software engineer, was a full-time developer, I still find myself sometimes making assumptions about, oh, well, I think that developers want to see this type of documentation, or, they probably really only want to hear about this particular programming language. And I know that I'm in dangerous territory if that starts to happen, because really we should always be not only listening to the community, but also looking at the data that's coming in and really taking in all of those factors as we decide, how we actually want to craft a message and craft things that developers can use. So as I mentioned, when I was in journalism school, when we were like in Journalism 101, one of the very first things that they taught us was that we should always be thinking about 5 different questions. And I think these questions can really be used to help generate ideas when you're approaching a marketing strategy. So the first one is who. So if we're thinking about who in the context of the developer community, we want to think about like, who are these developers? Not only, who are they as individuals? What are the types of things that they might like? What are the types of messages that they might respond well to? But I think one of the big things that we need to consider now is that there are a lot of people that use technology and use code to do their jobs, and they might not always have the title of developer. So there are a lot of folks out there right now that are business analysts, product managers, even folks that work on the procurement side of things that are vetting products to see how they work, to see if it would be a good fit for their business. And they do know how to make things with code, or maybe they're using a low code tool, something like Airtable, or at Twilio, we have a product called Twilio Studio that's really something that anybody can use to build something. So I think it's also important not to just think of developers as people that write code and create things with code, but also people that use a variety of the stack and maybe are doing a lot of different things in their job. The next question is what? And so when we think about what, it's all about, what do developers need? What do they need to be successful? And how can we create experiences and messages that are really going to resonate with what they need? When we think about the question of when, I think about it from this perspective of, when in the life cycle is a developer going to use your product? When are they going to be trying it out? So for some developers, it might be that their manager approached them and said, we need to find a new database solution. So I'm going to need you to research all of these different options. Or it could be, we want to get more data about our customers. We need a CDP. Can you go out and vet some? For others, it may be, I have 3 hours on the weekend that my kid is going to be at a sleepover, and I just want to build a fun app using an API that I've been really curious about. So none of these things are invalid. They're all very valid experiences for someone to be approaching, trying out your technology, but kind of having different forms of content and ideas of when they're going to be coming into that journey can be really useful to you. The next question is where. So I kind of think about where from 2 different standpoints. One side of where obviously can be quite physical, regionally, where are they? And what restrictions might exist in terms of that. For a company like Twilio, where we have phone numbers that developers can purchase, there are different regulations in different countries for phone numbers. So from that standpoint, it is important to think about where regionally the developers that are going to be trying things out are. The other where that I find especially interesting, and I want to explore a little bit more today, is where in someone's programming or development journey are they? Are they a beginner, who's maybe just done their first Hello World and are picking up coding for the first time? Or are they a principal architect who's been coding for 20 years and has built, huge systems? Because the types of content that you're going to have for both of those types of audiences are going to be quite different. And it's really empowering to be able to segment that out and approach them in a way that makes sense for them. And also not turn someone off by either giving them something that they're just not interested in or that feels a little bit too out of their depth. And the last question, which I find to be the most important, is why. Because if we don't know why we're doing something, it's very easy to lose sight of the entire purpose of it. And I think that for this, coming from a marketing standpoint, we want to think about, why are developers using your product? Why are they using your tool? And it could be something that's very business oriented. It could be that they want to save on the bottom line and this is going to save them lots of money. But it could also be, we're going to be able to cut a bunch of time by using this. We're going to be able to give people time back with their families, with their friends, by switching over, automating this process. So being able to tap into that emotional why can also be a really, really great tool to have in your toolbox. So the framework that I think is helpful to consider as you're thinking about how you want to structure your developer marketing strategy, there's outbound and there's inbound. So when we think of an outbound strategy, we're thinking of things like research. So this could be research that you conduct yourself or research that you find elsewhere about what the developer community is focusing on. What are the trends? What are the technologies? What are the programming languages that developers are using most frequently in the upcoming year or at the current time? There's also evangelism, which I feel very comfortable speaking toward because that is what I do day to day. But I definitely think of evangelism as an outbound motion because it is going out into the developer communities, whether that is going to a conference or a meetup, or even into a customer company or a potential customer company in order to meet developers where they are and tell them more about your product and enable them to get started with it. I also think of sales as an outbound motion here because sales has such a direct line into customers if your organization is at a certain scale. And so that actually can be an area that your teams can rely on to get an idea of what developers need and what they're doing. In terms of inbound, outside factors that are coming in, outside data that's coming into you, we can think of advocacy, content, and community. So advocacy and evangelism, I think sometimes are very interchangeable. The way that we think about it at Twilio, and in a way that I think makes sense, is that you're taking all of the feedback and insight from the developer community and you're bringing that back into the organization. And then you're advocating for those developers by saying, hey, we need to have a better command line interface, or we really need more documentation around this particular product. And then there's also content, which is huge. We all are familiar, I'm sure, with all sorts of content, whether it's a podcast or a blog or videos, of course. So, or even something like this that we're doing, right? Like some sort of conference that you're hosting. So content is a huge piece. And I have some thoughts that I've gathered from time at Twilio and just looking out in the industry that I'm excited to share with you that hopefully will be helpful as you're thinking about crafting a content strategy. And then the last piece of inbound is community. And community can look a lot of different ways. It can be a Discord server or a Slack channel, right? Like it can be a place where developers can just come and connect with each other. It could be a forum, or even the way that you monitor those different forums that exist, like Stack Overflow or Hacker News. So community can be very much something that you host yourselves or a community that you tap into, but really giving developers a place where they can share their feedback honestly, and you can take that and use that for your own insights is an incredibly powerful motion. So now I'm going to dive a bit more into the actual tactics that you can use from each of these questions as you're going through and thinking about, how do I want to connect with these developers? So the first one that we're going to talk about is who. So the strategy that I tie closest to who would really be the research piece. So I love surveys. I love sending out surveys before I host a hackathon or an event to find out about what developers want to use, like what products they want to use, what programming languages they want to use. We use NPS as a metric, which is Net Promoter Score, after the fact. So we ask people, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend this to a friend or colleague? So it's a pretty common marketing metric that's used. So I think it's great to have that, but I also like to dig more into the qualitative feedback, and I think there's a lot that can be gleaned from that. So surveys are a really fast and easy way to just get a pulse on the developer community. Another thing that is can be a really useful tool is to actually put together a CRM of your developer community. So if you can start gathering data about your developers at meetups, conferences, hackathons, and then you are able to contact them after the fact, that can be a really great way to just send out a little, hey, like take this survey and we'll send you some swag type of thing, so that you can actually get feedback from the community themselves on what it is that they want to see. The other thing is that I think can be really powerful, especially if you're in an organization that maybe is a startup, is smaller, and may not have like a full-fledged developer marketing organization or developer relations organization, is just finding a developer or a software engineer that knows your product really well, somebody that's actually building the product themselves, and asking them, like, how are things going for you? Like, what are you working on? What are you interested in? What are you noticing in the community? And if you can build that relationship, then that's also a person that you can turn to and say, hey, I really want to send out this email about, a new JavaScript feature. Could you give it a once over? What do you think? Does this make sense? So that way you kind of have like a sanity check there, and you're not having to like worry so much about whether that's going to resonate or not. Another thing that I think can be really great, if you're going to partner with the product team, is baking a survey into the sign up, right? So if somebody's coming and they're signing up to try your product, try to get a little bit of information about them, just so that you'll have that on the back end to be able to use to your advantage. The next question is what? And so this is, I think, really kind of where most of the tactical things come into play. So you're thinking about, what tactics are actually going to reach developers the best? Like, what do they want to see? What do they need? So I think the most immediate ones probably that you want to start thinking about are documentation, because if someone doesn't know how to use your product and they can't do it easily, you're going to lose them instantly. So, working with a docs team or a developer relations team that is able to work on that documentation, trying to figure out how you can cross promote that and utilize it in other areas is going to be immensely helpful. Step one. You definitely want to have swag. I'm laughing because I think that it's one thing that so many companies get so right. I've seen so much amazing swag just from the conferences that I've attended and the things that I've done. But it really does, if you have a quality product, whether it's a water bottle or a t-shirt or anything like that, people do remember that. That does reflect well on the brand. And another thing that you can kind of pair that with also is maybe like trying a free trial of the product. But really just thinking about like, what can I give to this developer that is going to make their lives easier? A big tactic that my particular team focuses on is we throw hackathons for customer companies. And it's a really great opportunity for the developers at those companies to get their hands on the APIs, build out a prototype, and actually see what it's like to try it out. And a big sort of focus that I have is just making sure everything's ready for the day of, making sure that they can log into the console, that they've got credits, that there are helpers on hand to back them up, give them assistance, help them debug. So really, whatever it is that you decide that you want to do, just focusing on that. I think another way to find out what developers need is looking at the metrics, right? Looking at the inbound of like how they're coming in and what content they're consuming as they're coming to your product. And a story that I think is really powerful is that one of the top performing posts on the Twilio blog is not anything to do with Twilio. It is a blog post about how to set environment variables, which, if you don't know what that is, basically if you are building an application, there are certain different credentials that you need in order to run it, but you don't want those exposed. You don't want those to be available anywhere on the internet. So you have to put them in a special file that hides them away. it's something that every developer, if they are building with a programming language, is going to have to do at some point, and everyone forgets how to do it. Like, it's not something that you keep in your brain, because it's a crucial step, but it's not a step that you need to remember. So one of someone who's now a product manager, but previously was an advocate and evangelist, he wrote this post on how to store your environment variables. And it has been the top post in search for years, because people are always searching, how do I set environment variables? And it's the first result in Google. I mean, it's one of the top results in Google. So your developers, yes, as much as they want to see things directly about your product, they also have needs outside of just that. And so if you can tap into that, if you can find, what is it they want to hear about? Maybe it's a new framework. Maybe it's a new technology or an integration potentially between your technology and another technology. Tapping into those types of ideas and finding a way to highlight them, especially from a search perspective, can be a really great angle to go from. When? So this one's very tricky, I will say. I think when is a little bit harder to pin down, because everybody is coming at your product from a different angle, and you may not always be able to determine, okay, this person is going to start using it because they actually have to integrate it into their own build, or they want to set up something to handle their neighborhood listserv, and so they're going to try it out because they need it for something, but it's not going to be like deployed to millions of people. It's maybe going to be deployed to 50 people. But I think this is a great time to tap into developer evangelists and also sales or solutions engineers that you may have in your organization. So the reason why I would suggest collaborating with these folks or maybe tapping into their insights is because they are the ones that are actually meeting the developers day in and day out, and actually seeing the use cases and the business challenges of what they're using your product for. So I'm very lucky that I work with, honestly, what I would say are some of the best solutions engineers around. And for the evangelists as well, although that sounds a little bit biased because I am one, but the solution engineers just have such a wealth of knowledge, and they see such a high volume of use cases from companies that are in the growth stage up to immense giant enterprises, and so they'll have a wide variety of experiences to draw from, and probably can even show you some demos of the use cases that they have to demo and show off on a very regular basis. So I would say try to become friends with these people, or even just set up a roundtable with them, invite them to a summit that your team is having, and just draw insights from what they're seeing. Where? I love the where question. I really love this one because I do think there is so much insight in this one. And I very recently was speaking with someone who was talking about how it can be so challenging sometimes because we're really lucky to live in a time when we have people that have been working in technology and coding for decades. And then we have people that, have just opened a code editor for the first time and are like taking a step toward this new career. And I've definitely been in their shoes, right? I've been that person that just needs to figure out like how to run a command in the terminal. And then I've worked with, folks that are much further along in their career, where if they were to open up, some documentation on how to do something pretty basic, they would, not need it. They might click away because they're just not gonna respond to it. So I think being really intentional about how you're approaching developers, trying to get some perspective on, is this an initiative? Is this a campaign that's geared more toward a coding newbie? Someone that's, in their first year of coding, is an apprentice or a junior developer? Or are we going to run a campaign where we really want this to be, are you a software architect? Do you need to know how to scale this particular build to millions of people? Because both can be very effective, and it's so dependent also on your product and on what you're trying to do. But I think just going into that and being aware of it because that is where you will lose developers. If you give a developer who's new something that's too hard, they're going to feel like this isn't for me, I can't do it. And if you give a developer that needs something a bit more challenging, something that's, not really going to give them what they're looking for, then you're also going to lose them. So in order to retain their attention, I think taking some time to consider this can be really helpful. And then the last one, why? So, why I think is really about listening. Why is about tapping into the community. And that can look like attending a meetup, maybe listening to the things that the developers are sharing there, talking to people that run the community initiatives. Maybe they look at the forums, or they go through Reddit or Stack Overflow or Hacker News, seeing what's coming up, like how are people mentioning your product? What are they talking about? Consider developers that do have some feedback that maybe is less than desirable, and take that to heart and really think about, is this something that maybe we need to escalate up the chain? If your organization does have an advocacy group, then they're likely already doing that type of work, but that's a really great way to partner with them, and to also make the developers feel heard and like you are paying attention to what they need. I think if you do have developer advocates, definitely rely on them, because they are going to be very close to that developer community. They're going to be super tapped into what they need. They're going to be very familiar with any sort of developer tooling that you have, whether that's a command line interface, or SDKs or libraries. So if they say that a developer wants to see something, you can take it on trust because they will know. So just to recap what we've talked about, we've gone over the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why of how you want to approach a developer. There are the outbound strategies of the ways that we reach out to the developers. And these types of teams are the ones that you're going to want to reach out to when you want to have an idea of what they're seeing in the developer community, what they're noticing developers doing already. And then for influencing what comes in, advocacy, content, and community are where you're really going to want to put your focus in order to figure out, what can we be doing internally to give developers what they're looking for and connect with them. And I just want to close with this quote from Seth Godin, who he said, "You can listen to what people say, but you'll be far more effective if you listen to what people do." So I think if you take that time to really pay attention to what developers are doing and act accordingly, you're going to have a marketing strategy that is going to feel relevant to developers and are going to make them want to use your product. So thank you all so much for your time today. Thanks for being here. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at ecmoy. I'll also drop my email. It's lmoy@twilio.com in the chat. And I think we may have a little bit of time for questions. So if you have any questions, would love to provide any sort of help there where I can.
Liz, thank you so much. That was great. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions for you, so I'll go through those now. I've got a couple of minutes. So first one is, what's one way to make sure you're reaching developers from non-traditional backgrounds?
That's a great question. And as someone who comes from a non-traditional background and also loves low-code tools and serverless tools, I'm super passionate about this. I think just finding ways to make building accessible to everybody is something that will set your strategy apart. There are so many, I think, organizations that do a great job of reaching a specific type of developer. But if you can really diversify that, and what that can look like is, okay, we have a blog post about how to build something using a specific programming language and database. What if we took that and we just modified it to be able to build it with something like Google Apps Script, for instance, or Airtable, where you can really build a web application, but you don't necessarily need to write code. And there will be somebody out there, I guarantee, who will be able to use that and come back to you and say, I was able to make something way easier for my team by using this. And then that way you're just spreading the usage of your product and really letting it apply to many different audiences.
Amazing. I'll quickly squeeze another one in. So I love the idea of including a couple of user insight questions as part of onboarding, but it's easy to think these might negatively impact your user experience. How many / what kind of questions would you recommend including?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I totally hear you. You don't want to lose people or make them feel like, oh, I'm giving away all this data about myself just to access your product. So I think some really simple ones, it depends on kind of like what you're hoping to get out of it. But I think finding out what programming language they're using and if they are what they're coming to build. So if you have a product for like, I'll just use Twilio as an example because it's top of mind. But for instance, like a lot of people will come to build with like WhatsApp or SMS. So they'll come to build a chatbot, or they might come to build an interactive voice response, like an IVR where you press 1 for sales, 2 for marketing type of thing. So just throwing a couple of use cases in there, because then that way you can see like what are people coming to build, and maybe you tie that back to the campaigns you're running and you say, oh, this campaign's for SMS and WhatsApp. It's going great, but IVRs, no one's coming to build an IVR. Do we need to put more of our focus on amping that up a little bit? What can we do? So I say keep it really simple, maybe just 1 or 2 questions, just to give you a little bit more color about the types of people that are coming into the sign up flow.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And yeah, really appreciate it. The talk was amazing. And yeah, if you want to connect with us, she can put our details in the comment section. But yeah, apart from that, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for having me. And everybody have a great rest of the conference.
Angie.
We hope you're enjoying the Developer Marketing Summit so far. Just before we jump into the next session, we are so excited to be launching the Developer Marketing Alliance as its own community. So keep your eyes peeled for the link to our new Slack community in the comments, where we'll be carrying on the discussion of all things developer marketing after the summit. Join to connect with peers, ask questions, get access to fresh content, hear about upcoming events like this one, and discover new opportunities. Also, don't forget you can re-watch these amazing sessions whenever you want with on-demand access. All you need to do is sign up for an Access All Areas Pass or PMA Pro membership. With a PMA Pro membership, you'll also get footage from past events, exclusive content, templates, frameworks to help you excel in your role, plus so much more. But for now, back to the Developer Marketing Summit.
Hello everyone, my name is Mario Viviani and I'm very excited to be here. Today I'll be talking about what does success look like in developer relations. How can you define meaningful goals for your team to drive success? So a few words about me. My name again is Mario. I'm Italian born, but I've been living in London for the last almost 7 years. And I'm a technologist at core. I'm a developer myself, and I come mostly from the mobile apps and game space, but I like to play with a lot of different technologies. Recently, I'm very passionate about things like AR and VR and blockchain. So in general, I like to tinker with things. Then I think that that's what drove me to developer relations in general. I've been also founding startups before my time at Amazon, but since 2015, I'm with Amazon. I started as their technology evangelist, and then I grew into different functions. And currently, I lead a team of developer advocates and marketers within the evangelist team under apps and games for Amazon devices. And within this role, I actually developed a series of experiences that I think might be useful to share with you today, in particular in regards to what does success look like in developer relations. So let's jump straight in. If there is what we can maybe call the mother of all questions in developer relations, it should be, how do you measure success? I know this is a question that I've been asked a lot of times by leaders in the different roles that I had before in developer relations, and it's probably the most difficult question to answer. And the reason for that is that there are a lot of preconceptions on developer relations, on what we do. These are all adjectives that have been given to developer relations from different members of teams and leadership teams that I've been working with. And developer relations has been referred to as a fluffy business, a touchy-feely business, or a squishy business. So in general, meaning with a type of activity that is difficult to measure intrinsically, something that is too human, too based on relationship and engagement to be something that can be measured. And I disagree. I actually think that that's what we actually have to do as developer relations experts, as developer marketeers, and as evangelists as well, is to actually demonstrate that developer relations can be a very data-driven world, and that everything that we do is not touchy-feely, but is something that not only can be measured, but that we can demonstrate as true value for the business. And when it comes to success, many companies, I would say most companies, are obsessed with the concept of measure of success. And I would say rightfully so, right? At the end, we want to know how are we driving success for the business, and that is the most important thing. However, when it comes to developer relations in particular, and even before we define the measure of success for developer relations, I think we need to take a step back and define what actually success means, because it has a lot of different nuances, and it depends a lot of different things depending if we're thinking about what does success look like for our team individually, for the functions of our team, but even what does success look like for the company overall that we work for. So what does good look like? I think that's the question that we need to ask ourselves when it comes to success. What does good look like for the company? So, for example, what is your company's end game? Not just your developer relations team, but your own company. What are they trying to drive? And why is it important to ask this fundamental question? Because based off of that, we can also reverse engineer what our contribution into this end game should be from a developer relations perspective. Then you should ask yourself, what is your department focus? Like, developer relations has a lot of different nuances. You might be more focused on the content and advocacy side, more on the marketing side. And think about who is your customer as well. Your customer, usually when it comes to developer relations, is the developer. We want to provide a great experience to developers and to push for adoption of some developer product. And this is often intrinsically different from the company endgame that might be, maybe the company want to push the purchase of a specific product by end consumers, which is very different from developers. So I think it's important to decompose what does that look like, and then start thinking about how your customer, the developer, and them taking action contributes into your company's end game. But usually for developer relations, success means a developer adopting a product. These could be a lot of different things. It can be adopting a new feature, launching a new version of something that is already out. It could be a new go-to-market product that we need to push adoption for. It could be like pushing adoption of documentation of a new SDK or an API. So at the end, usually there is some activity that you need to put down, some marketing or education activity that you need to put down, and then there is a result that you want to measure, which is adoption. And we will talk a lot about adoption today. Adoption is what the end game should be for us as developer relations overall. And how do we get to adoption? That is the journey that we need to go through. So it all starts with tracking capabilities. You need to put yourself and your team in the condition of being able to say, I know the developer has consumed content X. You want to be able to track the developer activity, track what are they doing as a consequence of the input that you're providing, which is a marketing activity, sharing content, and so more. You need to track what you do. And then you need to attribute. So if tracking means that I know the developer has consumed content X, attribution means that I know that as a consequence of that, the developer has adopted the product. And this is easy said, but it's not easily done. There are actually a few potential configurations for this. There are mostly two scenarios in which most of the developer relations organizations find themselves in. There is what I would call the ideal tracking and attribution scenario. You have your entire developer journey is tracked. That means that all the steps from discoverability of your marketing content and activity down to the content consumption and finally with even the product adoption are tracked end to end. The entire journey of the developer that goes through it is tracked. This means that you can easily build attribution. You know exactly who came into your marketing activities, who is coming top of the funnel, who has consumed the content, and who has adopted it. This means that you can determine causation. Action causes result. You can demonstrate that. You have data and reports that clearly define this journey. And if you're in this configuration, in this scenario, 5 stars, you're done from an infrastructure perspective. You have all the building blocks that you need to be able to demonstrate success. You can go to your leadership and say, we've done X amount of marketing activities, with X amount of developers, and we know exactly who these developers are. These developers consume content, and a certain amount of them took action, and we know exactly who they are. So this is great. You can go to your leadership and demonstrate value. You can demonstrate attribution. You can demonstrate adoption of the product directly as a consequence of your marketing activities. This also means that you are probably in something like the 1% of all developer relations organizations. Most developer relations organizations actually are in what I would call the second, less ideal scenario. So the less ideal tracking and attribution scenario is where you actually don't have end-to-end tracking and attribution. The vast majority of developer relations organizations are in this situation. And a lot of the younger new developer relations organizations usually end up here, which means that you have two things that you can measure. You can measure your marketing activities, so the action that you're taking. You can see how many campaigns have you done? You can measure how many developers are even looking at the content and, what content is being consumed. You know that. And then you have on the other side, you can measure the product adoption. You know how many people are using your product, how many developers are using your product. What you can determine, because you have a broken tracking mechanism, you can determine if action cause result. You don't know if the same developers adopting your product are the same developers that have, seen your marketing activities and consume the content. That is usually due to, again, non-complete marketing tracking mechanism and business intelligence. That is fairly common also when it comes to a lot of the activities that most developer relations deploy. If you're thinking about, for example, publishing YouTube videos or attending third-party developer events, most of the time you don't know who is consuming the content. You don't really have a way to capture who these folks are. And so you don't really know if those people that have seen your content as consumer content are the same developers taking action and adopting your product. And if you go back to your leadership team with just like a broken process where you have, something on the marketing side who said, we did X amount of activities, and also separately, here's how many developers have adopted the product. You cannot really demonstrate that the developers adopting your product are the same developers that are, going through your marketing activities. So what you need to demonstrate, what you need to build, is a body of evidence that allows you to demonstrate that there is, if not causation between your activities and the final result, at least there is correlation between the two. You need to be able to build out, to demonstrate a journey between action and result. If you're able to do that, then you will start fixing this broken funnel where you don't have entire end-to-end attribution. So now you'll say, okay, Mario, that all sounds great, but how do I build correlation? How do you determine correlation? There are a few mechanisms that you can put in place to determine correlation, and everything really starts with defining meaningful goals for your team, to define what the North Star is, but also what are the type of activities and type of goals and KPIs that you put down to your team. So how do you define meaningful, measurable goals for your team that contribute into demonstrating adoption? So the first step here in demonstrating correlation is making sure that you fully understand what are your team's levers. And when I say levers, I mean what are all those activities, let's say those buttons that your team can push to determine a change in behavior by the developer. And this is very different from the top level goal that you should set for your team. Your top level goal should always be related to adoption. Like the North Star that you need to give your team is, we want to drive adoption of a certain product or of a new feature. That should be the end game. That should be where you want developers to get to. However, the mechanism to get there, to get to adoption, should be, what are the levers that your team can control to get there? And when it comes to levers or activities, they need to be very specific and about the different functions that you have, and they need to be about what they can actually control, what is in their control. So let's think about developer advocates or developer evangelists. They are usually tech experts that create content and distribute content with the developer community. So you could assign set levers like produce X amount of pieces of content on this specific product, or reach a certain amount of developers speaking about this product, or about quality, maintain a speaker quality on talks about product X. And there are a few ways to measure that. Or if it is your marketing team, marketing is usually about distributing content with the biggest number of developers. So you can think about things like levers like deliver X amount of campaigns on product X, drive X impressions to the technical content about product X, or for example, reduce bounce rate on content about a certain product. At the end, it boils down to what are the things that are in your team controls, and they can feel empowered when they reach those goals. And the interesting thing is that when you look at them, these are measurable team functional KPIs. These can literally be the goals, the meaningful goals that you assign to your team. Because if you go to your entire team, to let's say to your developer advocates, and you assign individually to that team or to that person to drive adoption of a product, it's not really in their control. What they can do is control their inputs, their levers into the business. So it's good to assign measurable KPIs related to these levers. And this applies to advocacy, marketing. You can do the same with documentation and all the different aspects of developer relations. And the great thing is that this allows you to have a framework of reference when you are debating performance with your team, when you're debating if they're reaching their goals, and even understanding if the things that you're doing are the right or wrong. So the next question is, how do these levers actually relate to the broader business and delivering correlation and driving correlation between activities and adoption? So what you need to do is to measure how levers correlate to adoption. And the only way that you can do this is through data. You need to build dashboard and reporting where you are tracking all the activities that your team is doing and tracking adoption. And you need to start cross-referencing this information. Literally, it can be a shared master table where you have adoption at the top, and then you have all the marketing activities declined as well. What you also have to do is to determine a sensible time frame for analyzing the behavior of developers, because what you will have is you will see peaks and down peaks in adoption of your product, and then you will see activities by your team which are displaced in time. And you want to start looking at trends. Let's say we added more activities on the marketing side, we added more paid marketing, we did more events, we did more content sharing about this product, and over time we see growth in adoption of the product, or maybe we don't. Hence, you start driving conclusions between the correlation between your input, your levers, and the output, which is adoption. What this sensible time frame looks like, it really depends. It depends on your business, on the rate of adoption. So I make an example. Let's say, for example, app developers, let's say they were doing a talk about a new feature that is very complicated. You cannot measure how many developers will adopt that feature the day after, because it might take 1 week, 2 weeks, depending on how complex that feature is for apps developers to take it on, build it inside their app, and releasing that app on the store of reference. So think about what is a sensible time frame and look at it in terms of something that you can adjust over time. Maybe 1 month is enough, maybe it needs to be 1.5 months. Work with your team to understand what is the knock-on effect when it comes to input versus output, and iterate. Like, this is not a precise science. It has a lot of different variables, again, depending on your team, depending on the inputs that you're putting in, depending if the content that you're creating is resonating or not with developers. But what you have to do is to constantly iterate and change things. That's why you want to define master goals for your team, for the individual functions that are flexible as well. Like, you might want to say, build a certain amount of pieces of content for your evangelists without necessarily defining if those should be videos or blog posts or Twitch live streams or events, because you don't really know what is going to work. And you want to get to a point where you learn what are the most effective channels for you. Ultimately, after you do this over time, and again, I want to be very specific here that it's a long game. You want to be in for the long game. you will get a picture of what levers control adoption and how. At that point, we will be in a much better position because you will know with a better degree of precision that by doing a certain input, by controlling certain levers, you drive a certain amount of output in terms of developer adoption. So in a sense, once we have defined all these tracking capabilities and we start attribute between levers and output, we have technically fixed our funnel in a way. We know that by doing certain action, we will drive adoption, which is what we need to go back to our leaders with and demonstrate in order to demonstrate value, to say we have strong evidence, if not direct causation, we have strong correlation between the activities that we're putting and the result that is coming out at the end, the adoption of the product. So some quick tips on how to get there in a better way and how to improve your tracking and funnel overall. First of all, brush up on business intelligence, or if you can, build a business intelligence team. Like your team needs to be able to manipulate data. Like get to the point if there is a BI team somewhere else, I don't know, you bribe the BI team to work with you. You need to be able to get your hands on data and build correlation of data. So in that sense, brush up on UI, on BI yourself. I know that's something that I had to do all the time to get better at collapsing, merging, and interpreting data. That is absolutely crucial. You cannot run a successful developer relations organization if you don't manage and manipulate data. Have your functions collaborate and share data. That is super important. Your marketing team and your evangelist team and your documentation team, your localization team, they should all talk to each other and share their data. You should even have a moment in which all this data comes together and you share with the broader team. The reason for that is, let's make an example, marketing and evangelism. Evangelists need to know what content is resonating more with developers. And marketing, they have usually all the visibility on what content resonates more, what type of, what are the videos and emails with the better click-through. And that data needs to be shared between the two because one informs the other. And also always have clear measurable call to action for your activities. An activity that you can't measure in any way is an activity that it doesn't demonstrate value to the business because you cannot associate and you cannot to the final result and you cannot build patterns on it. So, and last but not least, most importantly, if it is possible, focus on building end-to-end tracking and attribution capabilities to determine causation. So the correlation imperfect funnel is okay. As I said, as you saw today, there are ways to fix it. But if you can build your systems to get to the ideal scenario where you have end-to-end tracking capability, that's where you want to be. So work with your team, with your BI team, with your engineering team to make sure that you can get there at a certain point in time. So in conclusion, if we want to try to answer that question again, how do you measure success? You want to define meaningful goals. Meaningful goals means goals that are really related to what your team can control and what they can do to drive adoption. So your top level goals for your team should be about adoption, should be driving product X with developers. And your team functional goals should be about their levers and their action. By correlating those two, by analyzing the journey of the developer, and by measuring success this way, you will be making sure that you're contributing into not only your team success, but your top level company success. So I'm done for today. Before I leave you, I just want to say that I'm hiring. So if you like what you saw today in terms of our approach to developer relations, I'm hiring a developer evangelist in my team based in the UK. So please, here's a short link. Please reach out to me if you have any question, if you want to learn more about our team. It's a very fun team to work with, very dynamic, and will do a lot of cool stuff. So please, if you're interested or if you know anyone interested, get back. And last but not least, thank you very much. Here's all my contact details. You can reach me via email, on social media, mostly on Twitter or on LinkedIn. And it was a pleasure being here today. If you have any question, reach out to me, and have a great rest of the Developer Marketing Summit. Thank you.
Why Instruct? It's technical ready. It's ready for more folks. It's ready for developers, for operators, for people who need to see and believe the code. It's feature ready. That means it has all the features I need for tracking if my customers are happy, for tracking what their progress is, and if it actually works for them.
We use Instruct, for our sales-led and product-led growth strategies at HashiCorp, and the ability for us to, have more of a self-service type of approach where it makes sense for people, accessing these types of sandboxes.
Developer marketing. It's almost an oxymoron. Developers are known for hating marketing. But what if I told you that there are many types of marketing that developers not only tolerate, but actually love to engage with and rave about to their friends? Hi, my name is William Chia. I'm the Director of Product Marketing at Asano, and I'd like to tell you about my upcoming Product Marketing Alliance course and certification for developer marketing. I've been marketing developer tools for over a decade at companies like Twilio and GitLab, brands that are known for having great developer credibility. I'll share with you the fundamentals and the secrets of great developer marketing. In my course, you'll learn how to write copy that excites instead of alienates. You'll learn when a developer is not a developer. Here's a hint, it's more often than you think. We'll cover the complex and dizzying array of software personas, and we'll break it down into easy and digestible takeaways. We'll even answer questions like, do I need to learn to code? And how do I work across the organization to get everyone on the same page with developers? If you're new to marketing technical products and want to come up to speed as quickly as possible, or if you're a seasoned tech marketer and you really want to hone your craft, then check out my developer marketing course. Head over to certified.productmarketingalliance.com and look for developer marketing. For a limited time, you can get $100 off if you pre-order the course. Once you're developer marketing certified, you'll avoid the pitfalls that can turn off your customers and instead create marketing experiences that developers clamor for.
Whether you're joining one of our events for the first time or if you're a seasoned regular, welcome to the Developer Marketing Summit. We have an incredible selection of innovative content lined up for you today, but before we dive in, I just want to say a huge thank you to our sponsors, speakers, and you, our lovely audience, for joining us. From wherever in the world you are watching, we're sure you'll enjoy today's talks. To get the most out of these sessions, please make sure you're sharing your feedback and asking your questions in the comment section for our speakers to answer. Each of today's sessions recordings will be uploaded into our on-demand content library, which you can access with a PMA Pro membership or Access All Areas Pass. We are also really excited to announce the launch of the Developer Marketing Alliance becoming its very own community. You can now join our Slack channel to connect with peers, get access to fresh content, and discover new opportunities. So with all of this to look forward to, let's get started.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm Jess Petrella. I am a Canadian product marketing manager. I've worked in SaaS for over 10 years, and I currently work at Unbounce as Group PMM. So what are we learning today? We are going to chat through a few modules for introducing new technical audiences to your company by crafting well-researched personas that everyone can get behind. So this is for both beginners and seasoned product and marketing folks. So if you're new to working with technical audiences and personas, this will be a great primer. If you're a more seasoned product or marketing person, you can gather some new tips, tricks for creating and sharing technical user personas. And what this will look like, as I mentioned, this is broken down into 3 modules. So we'll go through what a technical persona is and what the components of it are, how we create them, so going through 4 stages, and also how to align your teams and renew your research, also in 4 steps. So what is a user persona and why do we need them? By definition, a user persona is a semi-fictional character based on your current or ideal users. So personas can typically be created by talking to users and segmenting them by their various data points. In practice, we use personas to align our teams behind a shared understanding of who our target audiences are. It will also be lend to improving developer experience, so tailoring your developer community initiatives and your developer education programs, as well as optimizing your comms channels, value props, and messaging. So it's a tall order, and I will break that down as we go through this chat. So also something to keep in mind is there's over 55 million ICT professionals working worldwide. So user personas help you create your focus on who your product is for. Can't be for everyone, it's definitely for someone. So what does a technical persona look like? And we can talk through the 5 key components here. So this is an example of a high-level user persona matrix. In this example, we are talking about a fictional company called Awesome SDK. Like I said, this is very high level and it's very simplified. The reason being is when you're starting out with a new set of user personas, you do want to go through a lot of validation work. So you do want to keep things simple and then give yourself time, give your teams time, your company time to build and adapt stories from there. So this is the general breakdown that we'll be looking at today. A persona is your identified high-level users. The description describes your high-level user category. Your segment is unique segments of users found within your high-level user category. And then characteristics are unique characteristics of each of the user segments. And then use cases are unique use cases for this segment plus your product. Use cases, this could also be goals. Typically for a more technical audience, a use case will help create a little bit more differentiation. So if we look at this in practice, let's assume that Awesome SDK is going through building out their personas for the first time, and they've identified the solo developer and describe it as Solo likes to find projects of interest and work on them alone for personal gain. While they've talked to folks within this persona that use their product, they've defined two separate segments. One is that they have a group of folks that are income motivated and another that is recognition motivated. And what that means is their characteristics might be a little different, but their use cases will be differentiated quite a bit. So for an income motivated solo developer, their use case is to build projects to make a passive income and gain promotions in their current job. A recognition motivated segment within the solo developer persona, they're looking to build projects to win awards and prizes and grow their resume. We also look back into their characteristics. We notice that the recognition motivated segment is a bit younger than the income motivated. So they're earlier in their career, they're at a different point, they're using your product for a different reason. So that's just one example. Again, it's very basic, it's pared down, but it allows you to have a lot of room to grow and build on top of it as you get to know your customers. So now that we've gone through what a persona is, what we use them for, what they look like, I want to chat through how we create them. So there are 4 key stages. I will talk through these on the high level, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty as we go along. So the first stage is research it. That entails surveying, interviewing, identifying your early personas. The second stage is define it. So you're drafting, sharing with a small group, and revising. The third is segmenting it. So crafting your segments, getting into the details and the differences of your personas. And the fourth is applying it. So going through the process of aligning your teams, validating your personas, and renewing your research. So getting into the research portion of this, it's always good to start with a survey. So if you have users, I recommend sending out a survey to your users to easily begin to bucket them by their responses. So the type of questions that you'd want to ask would be around characteristic questions like geography, age, coding languages, years of experience, job title, and team size. And then more value-based questions around use cases, goals, motivations, pain points, and desired outcomes. While you're going through this survey process, asking them as a question within your survey, if they're open to being interviewed as a next step is always a good thing to sort of help, set you up for your next stage of your research. And then to make it easy on yourself, leverage tools like Typeform to create a quick CSV output of your responses. So then you can, when you get into bucketing them, you're able to actually pull out responses. The second stage is interviewing them. So now that you have folks that have opted in, you can send out an open call for interviews. So sharing incentives like gift cards will obviously greatly increase your bookings. So I always recommend that. In these interviews, you want to dig into your value questions. So learning more about their unique goals and motivations, desires, outcomes, pain points, and processes will be beneficial at this stage. I do recommend to put your detective hat on, keep an eye out for patterns to note or common threads to pull on. And then again, to make it easy on yourself when you're booking these interviews, use a tool like Calendly to organize your booking and increase your conversions. And then the third step to this is to identify. So now that you're loaded with your qualitative and quantitative research, it's time to distill your key learnings. So looking at things like where your biggest buckets of characteristics have fallen, what were the leading use cases, goals, pain points, and desired outcomes? What connections can you make amongst groups of the above and why? And this is sort of an opportunity to, those threads that you pulled on in interviews, the patterns that you saw come up, the larger buckets of characteristics and use cases that you're starting to see form. These are what create your personas. So another little tip here is to make it easy. Share your research with a team member. So if you have a trusted or close collaborator that you work with quite often, ask for feedback and perspectives. Ask them to be a sounding board, share, the patterns that are coming up and the and the sort of hypothesis that you're starting to form about how your personas might break out into groups. That always helps to sort of validate your thinking, but also bring new perspectives into the conversation. So once you've completed your research, or your first round of research at least, you're digging into defining it. So you're drafting your high-level user personas. At this stage, it's okay to make some bold assumptions. You're putting some think time here. You're putting your thinking cap on. You're revisiting your research, and you're trying at this point to form your groups and buckets of personas. Second stage of this is once you have this draft completed and you're feeling, somewhat confident with it, you can start sharing it with your close team and selected key stakeholders. This is not to inform them. This is not to get them on board or get buy-in, but you do want to start taking a temperature check on your initial draft. And this will help to ensure that any biases or unfounded assumptions that you've created as you're working through things are being sort of, poked into from the start. So make your feedback expectations clear at this stage. You can ask them direct questions like, is this how you see our users? Why or why not? In your opinion, what is off about how we're looking at our users and the persona buckets that I've created, and what matches up? And this can be very telling. You might get a different response from product, you might get a different response from marketing. But what's interesting at this stage is that it will illuminate a lot of interesting perspectives that you can use or take into account as you're building your personas. And then another positive byproduct of sharing a draft with key stakeholders is that you may arrive at quicker buy-in by involving folks in your process. Then the third step of this would be to revise. So now that you have more eyes on your initial research and high-level user personas, you should be able to confidently lock in your choices. Keep in mind that at this stage, nothing is set in stone, so user personas can evolve over time. And the goal here is to create a starting point. So you've taken the research that you've done, you've made some bold assumptions, you've sanity checked with your team, and you're feeling confident that the buckets of personas and perceived segments at this stage are starting to form in a way that can be useful. The third stage of this will be to segment it. So you're already starting to think about this before this stage, but this is where you start to fully identify it. So you're digging into the details. With your high-level user personas in hand, it's time to sort of get a little bit more granular and get into the finer detail. You're asking yourself questions. Is it possible to bucket each user interview into your identified user personas? If it is, then you have a signal of early success that your user personas are well-defined. And then what are the commonalities in your use cases, motivations, values, and characteristics of those folks that you interviewed? How can you identify those per the bucket and understand, how those things might create patterns or what you're seeing come up as common for each of those. Then you also want to spend some time thinking about the differences between these bucketed user interviews. A big part of the segmenting your users is identifying who they are, but it's also just important to determine who they aren't. So there should be clear differences between your segments, and at minimum, the use cases should vary. If not, your segments are just not ready yet. You may need to perform more research to get to where you're going, and that's okay. You can go back to step one, talk to more customers, go back to step two, share it again with your team. It does take some time to really find the details and the differences that can help you create a little bit more granular understanding of who your users are. And then the fourth step is applying it. So we'll dig into this a little bit more than we did the last few groups, because aligning your teams becomes one of the most important parts of building these personas. Your teams want to be informed, and that's something that you should keep in mind when building these out. They want to be informed, and how they want to understand how the personas will enrich their work. The teams that you'll be talking to vary, but some of the most impactful teams that you can be talking to are your DevRel and your support teams. Personas can support their playbooks, their targeted outreach, their developer experience and everything that they build into it. Some of the metrics on their side that can be affected by this, where you can see a positive uptick or help move the needle with, are their engagement metrics, their reply rate, satisfaction score, time to ticket resolution, and so on. The developer community team as well, detailed personas can help them tailor content, dig into specific problem solving, tailor tone and message, and metrics that you can move the needle on with more targeted communications would be engagement levels, number of new advocates, number of new active members, and so on. Your PMM teams, your marketing and product teams, also very interested in close to user personas. They can use these to enrich their content, their targeted comms, and their message market fit. And then some metrics that they would be interested in as well are adoption rate, demo conversions, number of feedback inputs, activation metrics, and so on. So this is just sort of high level, and it gives you an idea of the types of interests that these teams might have specifically. So when you do talk to teams, and we'll get into a little bit more, it is great to sort of talk to their specific interests and their specific metrics. So one way to look at this is that enablement can exist on a cycle. So starting with educate, which we'll dig into next, and sort of moving into the optimize stage, which we'll also dig into validate and revise. Every revision restarts the education enablement cycle. So when educating your team, so at this point you have in your hands your packaged user personas along with your research reports, recorded interviews, and survey data. At this stage, it's important to show your work. Your teams will want to dig into your research. They'll want to hear from your recorded interviews and hear from your customers. Not everyone will, but some will. Some folks will take your, package user personas as face value, and some will want to get a little bit more information and detail as you go along. So you'll sort of arm yourself with that packaged personas, reports, and interviews, survey data, etc. And then the next stage will be to share this with your team. So book info sessions with your teams and individuals to start. Aim for alignment, buy-in, and enthusiasm from your teams before bringing this out to the broader company. It's also super important at this stage to listen. So hear out your teams and your stakeholders' concerns, perspective, and ideas. Take all expertise and questions into account. And then joining forces with your team, be clear about your intentions for how they identify personas, segments, and data can enable the team specifically. So going back to that last slide, focus on the metrics, focus on this specific output and enablement that can be created per team and per specific team's needs. And then finally, becoming a stakeholder and an ally. This is arguably one of the most important parts of this. So once you have shared and enabled and listened to your team, the goal is that user personas should enable comms, content strategies in many areas of the dev experience. As the champion of these user personas, you should be open to support future research, create revisions, and take in team asks. So you might be getting a lot of questions, which is good. That's a positive byproduct. You do want to be seen as the expert in this because you are the person doing the research. You are sort of bringing this into your team. And the more questions, the better. It means your teams are engaged, they're enthusiastic, and they see the value in what you're creating. And then finally, so as the cycle, once you've enabled and educated your teams, the cycle goes on to optimize, validate, and revise. So optimizing means that you would start small with the intention of learning. Where can you modify language, content, comms to speak clearly to your primary segments? So you would do that in sort of a test atmosphere in order to validate. So you would test something small like a blog post, a community engagement post, an activation email, A/B test a key page. And then you would look for a lift in the key metrics for that channel or for that team. And once you sort of started to validate things, you can then revise them as needed. So a big part of modifying and improving your user personas is to listen. So be open-minded to new perspective, changes in information, and additional data. Major and minor revisions to your user persona matrix should restart the enablement cycle. So that's just about it for the day. I know it's packing a lot into one conversation, so we'll have a quick recap. So we talked through the 5 components to a user persona matrix, which are high-level personas, description, segments, segment characteristics, use cases, and goals. We've also chatted through the 4 stages for crafting your user personas, which is research, definition, creating a draft, share and revisions, segmenting it, so crafting, getting into the details and the differences, and applying it through education, running tests, and renewing research. And then finally, the 4 stages of internal enablement, which are educate, optimize, validate, and revise, and repeat as needed. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining. I'm more than happy to take any questions, or if you'd like to connect, here's my email. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, and I'll add that over in the chat. But thank you everyone for joining. Have a great rest of your day.